come back to this idea that we talk about quite a lot, which is that we're in mysterious times, is the language we use. And, it's also, many people describe it as unravelling times. And if you're going to be truly walking through these mysterious times, actually the question becomes, how do we navigate? And that has to involve an amount of experimentation, because it's impossible, given what we're living through on all levels in our culture. Like, there's still too much sense of, if you do these things, you can be certain of knowing the outcome. And I always think of it as like walking in the mist, on another day on Dartmoor, when the mist comes down and you can hardly see in front of your face, and then occasionally you get these glimpses of clarity within those mists. The wind blows and you just get this vision, oh God, it's over there, the tour I need to be getting to. That, I think, is what we're talking about with these deeply mysterious times. We can't know. We have to experiment our way through it. And I think that's why we started this through. Let's just see what emerges, because when you're navigating the mystery in the way that we all are trying in some form to do, you have to start from a place of saying, I just simply don't know, but I just feel and trust that we're moving in the right direction. And you have to start by putting one foot in front of the other, otherwise you're just stuck still on a misty moorland. And so I think that was at the heart of it. That's just navigating the mystery. You have to start.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with me, Dan Burgess. The concept of the Spaceship Earth is simple. We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. Like a spaceship, we have a finite amount of supplies with an intelligent operating system, which keeps everything we need replenished as long as we all respect it and use wisely. So an understanding of how this system works, along with deep cooperation between humans and all life, is essential to keep us thriving and the spaceship flying. In this podcast, I'm in conversation with humans involved in regenerating life, shifting consciousness, and reimagining how we can live more beautifully and peacefully. I talk with artists, activists, writers, designers, adventurers, healers, entrepreneurs, creative mavericks, and more. Their stories invite us to participate in the co-creation of a more beautiful, life-sustaining world in service to life, becoming crew on Spaceship Earth. Greetings, Earthling. It's Dan here. Welcome to the podcast. Appreciate you tuning in. I'm emerging from the darkness of January into the stirringness of Imbolc in early February. So, I'm actually just about to begin a new season of podcast recordings after a fairly lengthy pause, due to the sort of beautiful uncertainty of life, which paused all things podcast for some time last year. But I'm excited about the new episodes, which will feature extraordinary human crew on Spaceship Earth. But before all of that, I want to share this episode, which is a deeper dive into the learning experiences offering, which has been gestating and now birthing through the podcast, a thing we call Becoming Crew, Unlearning Adventures for Navigating Mysterious Times. And this conversation is with my fellow Becoming Crew guides, Mark Sears and Evva Semenowicz. So when I started the podcast in 2018, it was at a time when I was kind of burning out in many ways, from about a decade of very intense creative activism, experimentation, agitation, campaigning with communities, brands, activists, artists, scientists, ecologists, and all sorts. And the podcast really started as a way for me to sort of reflect back on a lot of that through having conversations with others. And it's always been naturally for me about digging into deeper, longer form conversations with amazing human crew on Spaceship Earth who are deeply focused on regenerating life on this earth, bringing life back through their own unique gifts, imaginations, creative energies, and courageous actions. These are folks putting care, love, and connection vibes into the world around them. And these conversations are offered always as fertilizer, inspiration, provocation, and invitation, if you like, to cross a threshold away from the story of separation, competition, extraction, transaction, and distraction, which has kind of dominated these industrial times, which are now unraveling at pace, and crossing into a story of wonder and possibility, and imagination, of collective entanglement with life itself, of community, connection, and creative courage. It's a crew story about stepping into service on Spaceship Earth in service to life itself. And I continue to be blown away by the messages I get from listeners who reach out and share how much an episode is connected or something that they've taken from the podcast, and the support and the encouragement for me to keep going. And that is amazing to hear, and that does keep me going, which is why I'm about to get going with a whole new season of recordings. But I also know that many people are stuck, are seeking support on their own journeys and their own projects of change towards regenerative cultures and regenerative futures. These are individuals, organisational teams, communities, and that's no surprise, because we can't think and talk our way into the future using the same thinking, doing and being that has led to so much of the kind of destruction and divisiveness we're now experiencing. And one constant I've been exploring for years through my own work and journeying is this idea of participation, of becoming part of the changes we seek, of becoming curious inquirers, active participants, co-creators of the emerging future, becoming crew on Spaceship Earth. And part of that requires a confronting of our own vulnerabilities, fears, discomfort, deeply held assumptions, and the stories we tell ourselves which often stop us from meaningful action. And recognising this as being a fundamental part of the change we seek, because if you like, system change requires transformation at every level of society, including our own individual and collective level. And there's this dance between inner and outer relationships, which is really where I now firmly root from. Because when you really strip back terms like sustainability or regeneration or climate action, environmentalism, fundamentally, what we're really asking ourselves is, how can we coexist with all life, with nature and each other? How can we flourish together with the world we have not made? How do we find our true unique place within this vast intelligent web of life on Spaceship Earth and participate within that, contributing to the health of the whole through our own unique expressions in our work and lives and ways of showing up? That's kind of it when you get under the jargon and theories, because most of the enormous challenges we face are down to ways of thinking and being that have seen humans as separate from nature, separate from the living world around us, separate from the environment, separate from each other, battling it out in a zero-sum game to compete, grow, win, monetize, accumulate and be productive. And it's taking us to the brink. What if we're really being asked to do in this time is to deepen our relationships with life itself, to begin to unlearn a whole load of stuff we've been taught about normality, which we now understand is destroying life and dividing us, and begin to learn in new ways, to co-create new knowledge by re-entangling with ourselves, each other, and with nature, our more than human family, and through that begin to reimagine, redesign, and bring forth new ways of organising ourselves on this earth with new diverse stories of collective possibility, which are life-sustaining, life-giving, life-centred. Gregory Bateson, the anthropologist, systems thinker and author, had this saying: the major problems in the world are the result of the difference between how nature works and the way people think. The major problems in the world are the result of the difference between how nature works and the way people think. That's always spoken to me as a provocation. And so a frame I've been exploring in my own inquiries and been convening others around is, how can we learn to think like nature works? How can we learn to think like nature works? Now, that is in itself an intentionally trickster question, because does nature think, for example? And if so, how? And are we not nature ourselves? But anyway, this question is at the heart of Becoming Crew, which is an invitation to cross a threshold, to begin to remember, to dream, imagine and act, to begin to evolve ourselves in community with our fellow humans and more than human crew, in order to bring life back to ourselves, to each other, to this earth through our unique gifts, creative expressions and new stories manifested through our lives, through our work, through our organisations and our ways of being. It's about exploring our deepest and most alive questions, questions that these times are demanding we connect with. It's about connecting more deeply to nature, the operating system for all life, and the living world around us in the places we call home, tuning into the cycles of life, seeking guidance from the great rhythms and patterns of this earth, expanding our intelligence and ways of knowing beyond just the human intellect. It's about connecting and trusting our own unique creative energies and gifts, about experimenting our way into a different future, about cultivating the creative courage and resilience required to do extraordinary things, things that will fill our future ancestors with pride. And it's about collective evolution, putting love, care and connection at the centre, deeply listening to each other and supporting each other through these mysterious times. Over the last 2 decades, I've been fortunate to work from the hyperlocal to the global on many, many different issues, designing and launching community-focused, creative ways of deepening our engagement and understanding of climate and nature and its intimate relationship with our stories of culture, society, economy and technology. I've collaborated with amazing humans on the leading edges of change. I've gained deep experiential knowledge and cultivated practices which harness creativity, collaboration, culture, community to catalyse action and resilience on complex social, ecological and climate challenges. Alongside that, I've continued to work with wise teachers to expand my own perspectives and practices, especially when it comes to opening up to the more than human world and our relationship with nature. The conversations on the podcast continue to keep my horizon open and expanding. So in the last few years, I've been reflecting on what are the most vital and useful things I've learned and trying to integrate these learnings and practices that feel critical for these times into learning experiences. Experiences that create the conditions and space for people to begin to evolve themselves rapidly, together, in community, in deeper transformational ways, to connect with their true gifts and creative potential, and to orient those energies towards regenerating life itself, stepping into service as crew on Spaceship Earth. In the last 18 months, this prototyping has included a 6-month peer-supported Becoming Crew experience using the Huddlecraft methodology, organisational team experiences developed with the leadership team at hospitality chain Boston Tea Party, and a 5-week online-offline experience for individuals and teams, which we call Community Solo, which we've just kicked off our second cohort. Whew, so that was a lot, but it feels important to me at least to lay that out as we launch our 2023 Becoming Crew offerings in these weeks ahead. So back to this episode. This was recorded in a cottage on Dartmoor, as you do, a few weeks back. It's a conversation with my fellow Becoming Crew guides, Mark Sears and Evva Semenowicz. Now, I've known Mark for about 12 years and Evva for about 6 years. Interestingly, I met both of them through the Good for Nothing project, which I co-founded in 2011. And Mark set up the Brighton chapter, and Evva was part of a crew who brought Good for Nothing to Bath. They both have strong roots in the strategic and creative world. Mark at the time that I met him was head of brand strategy at the Virgin Group. And we've cultivated a strong relationship over the last decade on our own personal rewilding journeys, as I would call it. And at times we've been learning together. We were on the first cohort of the Call of the Wild under the incredible teachings of Chris Salisbury of Wild Wise. We went on to develop and grow the Wild Network for several years, which we launched on the back of the feature-length documentary film Project Wild Thing, which was nearly 10 years ago now. Absolutely bonkers. Mark has continued to develop his work exploring this disconnection from the living world in modern culture, working as a bridge guide and space holder with business and organisational leaders, with community groups and with some of the most marginalised communities in this country. And in recent years has been digging really deep into myth and story as navigation fertilizer for reconnecting us back into the places we live and the more than human world in these mysterious times. Evva was by trade a brand strategist and facilitator. We've worked pretty closely on a few different collaborations, including the social imagination project Dreamspace. Evva took part in the 6-month Becoming Crew peer-supported experience. She is an extraordinary holder of space. She works from a place of deep intuition. She creates trusted and I'd say sort of creatively fertile spaces where people feel belonging. She is fascinated in helping people connect to their own inner knowing and bringing the practices of embodied knowledge, new ways of knowing the world into the mix, which is pretty wild and essential for these times. So I'm really excited about what we're doing together, what we've been learning over the last 12 months as we've been shaping this emerging Becoming Crew offer. So this conversation is really a spontaneous, meandering, reflective conversation on some of the work we were doing last year, some of our learnings, some early thoughts on the intentions for this year. It's offered to you in the spirit of openness and emergence. It's part of our intention to work more in the open, to show our workings as we go and to try and make sense of what we're learning together, because Becoming Crew is really ongoing evolutionary practices. It's emergent work for emerging times. Anyway, I'm going to shut up now as that was a really long intro, but if you know me or you listen to me, you'll know that I have to speak to things to kind of make sense of them. So that's that. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this conversation. I hope if you're interested in what we're doing with Becoming Crew, visit the Becoming Crew site, becomingcrew.com, or you can find it off the podcast site. If any of this is interesting to you, reach out for a chat. We're open. We're here to listen. This is episode 63 of the Spaceship Earth podcast. Enjoy.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
Evva and Mark, hello. Welcome to our little live episode here on Dartmoor. We should give our listeners a little bit of an insight here into where we are. We're in a cottage on Dartmoor, and we've got some sun streaming in. It's mid-January, is it not?
It's Friday the 13th.
Is it?
I know. It's an auspicious day.
And your story got deleted.
And my story got deleted.
I know. We recorded Mark sharing a lovely little sort of mythic delight last night, and he was slightly apprehensive weren't you, Mark, when I said, can I record this? And why were you up? Tell us why that you felt it wasn't the right thing to do.
Well, there's an old storyteller's thing about stories that don't travel well in the recorded form. So I don't know whether this story needs or wants to be recorded. And but we did it, and I thought just go with it. And but this morning it turns out that the story didn't want to be recorded. It was there for the moment. It only lives in our hearts and minds. So
I know the memory card, the SD card in the recorder was storyless this morning, which was slightly strange.
Dun,
Because it was
dun,
definitely
dun.
on there last night. But there you go. So we can't share that story. But yeah, we're here, and it stopped raining. Well, no, it's raining again, but it's not sort of like rain as we knew it in the last few days, which is sort of
Torrential.
it felt a little bit like we weren't becoming crew, we were becoming river, as the river got higher and higher and higher and higher.
Yeah, it was quite something to be kind of immersed, or sort of like, it felt like surrounded by just sort of insane rain for it felt like several days.
And the footpaths that have decided for a while that they're going to be rivers, and everything felt like was water moving.
That's it.
But even I felt like just spending a bit of time with that river, like so fierce, so just like so high, so fast, and kind of like being in the presence of that force. I felt, and we went for that walk, and I really felt like something moved in us, and I sort of feel like the kind of, and we all came back from that walk with we used that word, didn't we? Chutzpah, we
You used it brilliantly.
with just like a sense of like, okay, there's some daring to be done this year, and I really feel like that was that was a gift from the river.
Yeah.
To sort of.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we came down to do a bit of reflecting and a bit of dreaming on what on this work, on this becoming crew mission, which we've been sort of experimenting with last year in 22 and increasingly towards the autumn. What would we say? We always like to say we've started whispering about it, and also then to sort of to create a bit of space to sort of to just sort of check in together on what came through, what happened last year, because it was a bit of as ever, the years seem to get crazier, and then to do a bit of dreaming into this year, and but it's interesting, isn't it? Because we we've lent this great cottage by dear friends Gail and James, and we've come down. But when you plan something, and then obviously it happened to be like this extraordinary extreme rain week, but how that sort of informs the sort of how we felt, I guess,
totally.
when we got into this space 2 days ago, and like yesterday morning, I thought when we were doing that kind of we decided, didn't we, to sort of like draw on images from, what kind of images we were holding from the work last year as a way of reflecting beyond words. And I definitely felt it was a really interesting exercise, but I definitely felt sort of in the cottage with the rain just continuing, like day 4 of this rain or whatever it was. That was really impacting how I was thinking maybe about this work this year. And like you saying, it wasn't until we actually started to move out onto the moor late yesterday afternoon when the rain finally stopped, that a sort of another dimension of the sort of energy of this stuff sort of shifted.
Yeah. It's interesting for me because it's always this dance of going inwards and reflecting is, is vital. It's a really useful thing to do. And there always has to be a point where you're like, get over yourself and you take it out, you take it out, you get out of yourself. And, what I think you're speaking about was like we were kind of like sinking in quite deeply and quite literally into the couches and thinking, yeah, what is it that I'm holding? What are my images? And then there's a point of like, okay, now I need to get out onto the moors and walk with this stuff and be with this stuff with, you know, in the context of the larger web of life. So it's always that dance between reflection, going inwards, and bringing it back.
But it felt to me like there was this beautiful invitation by, if you like, the living world yesterday, that the morning was just this deeply intense torrential rain that felt like it was coming, the river rising and rising and rising. And just at that point that we were sitting, reflecting, deepening, everything cleared. And it was almost as if that was the invitation. And I wonder what would have happened yesterday if it had carried on raining.
Oh,
whether
God.
actually our energy would have gone, we're just going to keep on deepening. But it just felt like there was this moment that just said, look, God, it's bright and it's beautiful. And then as we were stepped out onto the high moor, just as this beautiful light came across, the sun was just beginning to go down, and it cast this golden, almost like buttery haze across everything. It just felt like there was this invitation to be different, to think differently, to behave differently. And it felt, all of a sudden the chutzpah started to flow. And I'm just curious about how that would have been so very different had it just carried on raining, and how our energy would have responded to it.
You know, it's making me think about just this whole thing that happens when you let go of the control. You know, in this case, they let go of the control of the day. So we didn't come here with a very specific agenda. At 2:00, we're going to do this. We really sort of allowed ourselves to be guided by the energy. And the same thing happened with the community solo, you know, in terms of it being set and guided by the winter time and the darkness and the kind of the heaviness of that time. And it's not like we necessarily truly designed it that way.
What are you talking about? It was totally intentional.
It was just, of course, it was very precisely designed. It's the spirit of emergence.
I find this though that you know, also personally some of the most challenging, the tension between this in this time, in this moment with. You know, I found that such a you know, because it is this trusting something very different to what our culture has told us we must trust. You know, the culture of doing and of control and of productivity and you know, not wasting time and you know, programming detail and you know. Do we need? You know, we need more. We need more. You know, and then trying to let go of that and trust these other ways of allowing, you know, the answers or at least the insight that you're seeking to emerge in a more, you know what I mean, the direction of travel to sort of unfold in a more open, emergent way. It's I guess that's what a lot of this is about, because it is a big shift, and for people to trust that, and I guess ultimately it's about trusting yourself, isn't it? Trusting your own inner compass that the right or the thing that's supposed to happen will happen, which is so countercultural to the sort of the machine. And yeah, you're right. Yesterday was a sort of really interesting example of that, of not over programming, of not trying to. And I have to say, I still did. I had a couple of moments yesterday. I was like, you know, should be getting on. You know, should it be sort of like, you know, as my internal voice was like, God, there's loads to do, and you know, but then just sort of like quietening that a bit. And
I mean, trust is so huge in all of this. You know, and I guess it's easy to say trust when the conditions for trust are set there. And I feel like, you know, that's one of the big reflections I have in terms of us collaborating and working together. I don't exactly know why, actually, but I feel a tremendous amount of trust of working together. And I've been thinking about, like, why do I trust Dan and Mark and this.
It's a great question.
This whole why do I trust in the conditions that somehow have appeared through us and through us collaborating together? And I don't quite know how to articulate it, but I know it, I feel it when it happens. I feel it in my body actually when it happens, that even when we're working on stuff together, and even in those moments where the internal voice goes like, oh shit, should we have a bit more of a plan for this? Should we be controlling this a little bit more? I'm able to, quiet that voice, and things do emerge. And, I've had so many of those moments where I sort of like looked around, I was like, oh, wow, that just happened out of sort of seemingly nowhere. And I think that's what happens when you're at the threshold. Love talking about thresholds, but when you're at the threshold of like, no, I really have the itch to control. If you're able to sort of stay with that moment and not fall into wanting to control things again, that's where I think like something really, really special happens. And I think trust was also a really big theme, and I think we all felt that with the first cohort of Community Solo, the people that trusted to go on this sort of like quite a mad offering, mad adventure that we put out into the gratitude that I felt for people to trust, and because they brought that trust into the process, I think it allowed it. I know it allowed it to be what it wanted to be. So yeah, trust is a big theme.
What was that? I can't remember. It was someone wonderful said that. I'm not going to be able to repeat the line properly, but it was something like traveling at the speed of trust.
Yes, it's quite. I mean, I don't know whether it comes from them, but it's definitely a big theme in the work of Ajahn Marie Brown. Trust, going at the speed of trust, or working at the speed of trust.
It makes me think about the whole idea of when things just feel right, and how that's become something that it almost culturally never feels like it's enough for things just to feel right. And this idea you talked about, Evva, just then about being at a threshold, and actually at that point stepping across the threshold, does it feel right? And I think that's my own sense of the trust between the three of us. It just like kind of just feels right, and therefore just keep leaning into that feeling, as opposed to then go, well, it feels right, so why don't we write down a structure, create a structure that articulates, scale it. That's, we need to scale it. But it's almost like, I think my sense is each of us has that sense of, well, let's just keep leaning into this and allow what emerges between us, rather than that whole sense of, well, it feels right now, so let's try and crystallize that feeling into a thing. And it's a dance, isn't it? All this stuff. It's like, how much structure do you need to put around things that feel right? It's a constant dance. But I guess my sense of trust comes from around the fact that we all, I don't know whether it's like the dance is somehow coordinated between us. We're all dancing to the same rhythm, tune.
It is, and it is, and it is complicated as well. This because of that, because we're all still plugged into, a systems and culture that predominantly runs on, or wants to, at least I would say illusionary, run on a concept of certainty and control, and cause and effect, and sort of like, I don't know, it's kind of, so it's very hard. For example, even just as we've been, in 2022, I guess, experimenting with this work, and actually that there was only really, it's work that can only really be born through experimentation, because it's the shape of this work is emergent, right? And we're learning really through practicing with people and creating experiences, and then trying to sort of figure out what felt right, not just from our own perspective, but with those that we're working with, and therefore, okay, that feels like a practice or an experience that can be useful for this group of people or this organisation in the journey that they're seeking to go on. But the old model, having sort of, spent 20 odd years sort of in that old model of consultancy and innovation and strategy and, of trying to work through processes and tools and, these kind of ways of doing things that end up becoming, this is art, this is how we do it, and it's all very sort of like you go through the process and something pops out at the end, or or some shift happens or some idea happens and off you go and plug it into the machine and keep going. And of course, there's lots of great things have come out of those kinds of approaches, but we're so at the limits of, there's also so much unseen destruction that comes through those processes, which we're starting to see and feel and all sorts of things. So it's interesting for me to think about it, because it's been getting this work out and trying to understand even who it's for, or who could be most. I'd argue it's for everyone, but who potentially is most ready and could most benefit from this, from working like this. But it's hard because we still and when you're working in the economics as well, which we all are, because we're plugged into this, whether we like it or not, a system, a machine that demands a sort of economic terms, which are getting increasingly difficult for everyone. There's again this demanding that sort of kind of what do I get through this process? What will happen if I'm whether I'm a team or whether I'm an individual? What will this process give me? And that's hard as well, because there's a lot of this again is like, well, if you are sort of trying to create conditions for things to happen, and there is some mystery in that, and it involves participation from everyone. So it's not that sort of we're gonna give you, we're gonna help you get the answer and off you go. That feels again sort of old story. And so I think last year one of my reflections has been, we did a bit of work. We sort of prototyped this, I guess, this offer for what felt like an interesting offer for a team within an organizational context that are being confronted with change. And that was the work we did with Boston Tea Party, and then obviously the other things that we got out towards the end of the year, which was much more about sort of individual journeying, and with the community solo and the online gathering spaces that we were doing, Space for Not Knowing. So we did quite a lot of experimentation last year, and it's interesting to me thinking back about how those different groups of people respond and what people's expectations are, but then what happens through the process or the journey that you can tell something's shifted. Do you know what I mean? That sort of changes. That there's been a change in how someone, when they came into one of these experiences, and then they come out of that experience, something has shifted. But I still feel like I don't think we could have started any other way than a very experimental, open way, because I kind of feel you tend to then root yourself still in that sort of more comfortable illusion, I would say, that it's a solution, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? I'm rambling a bit here, but do you know what I'm sort of saying?
I do. It makes a lot. So for me, I come back to this idea that we talk about quite a lot, which is that we're in mysterious times. Is the language we use, and it's also many people describe it as unraveling times. And if you're going to be truly walking through these mysterious times, actually the question becomes, how do we navigate? And that has to involve an amount of experimentation, because it's impossible, given what we're living through on all levels in our culture. Like there's still too much sense of, if you do these things, you can be certain of knowing the outcome. And I always think of it as like walking in the mist. On another day on Dartmoor, when the mist comes down and you can hardly see in front of your face. And then occasionally you get these glimpses of clarity within those mists. The wind blows and you just get this vision, oh God, it's over there, the tour I need to be getting to. That, I think, is what we're talking about. With these deeply mysterious times, we can't know. We have to experiment our way through it. And I think that's why we started this through. Let's just see what emerges, because when you're navigating the mystery in the way that we all are trying in some form to do, you have to start from a place of saying, I just simply don't know, but I just feel and trust that we're moving in the right direction. And you have to start by putting one foot in front of the other, otherwise you're just stuck still on a misty moorland. And so I think that was at the heart of it. Let's just navigating the mystery. You have to start.
And for anyone that's sort of listening, thinking, what is certain in this work that you're doing? In my mind, is that we are trying to create experiences that are helping us root more deeply back into the living world. And to start to open up to life that is more than just human. That's a sort of fundamental part of this work. To work to sort of help each other work with the stuff that is most alive inside us, which is often hidden in our modern cultures and organisations and whatever. So trying to create a space for the real kind of mysterious inquiries that are probably sitting in us to come through. And then this idea of course of exploring in community, and again, that's human and more than human, but this idea that we're not alone, and actually when we start to learn and work and explore and experiment together, there is sort of really extraordinary possibility that seems to emerge through that. But I would say that's probably about it. That's the sort of fixed, isn't it? And the rest we're sort of experimenting with.
Yeah, for me, and when we were doing the little practice of drawing the frames that stayed with us from last year, from the experiments from last year, like if I close my eyes now, like one of the frames that is coming up to me really clearly is this idea of weaving something really tender. And I think we talk about it quite a lot, that at the heart of this work is connection. Because if we accept that a lot of the issues that we're facing right now stem from the disconnection, right? Disconnection from ourselves, disconnection from our communities, disconnection, this idea that we're somehow separate from the natural world. This disconnection. So to me, when it comes to certainties, it feels like on the other side of that is weaving connection. And it feels like, to me, it feels like we're weaving something really tender. Like, again, if I close my eyes now, it feels like a really tender, almost spider web. And it's, I had a really embodied experience of it during the community solo, seeing how the weave of connections between the people that joined us and between us as guides, how they were being weaved, and the people rooting into the places that they call home, and rooting back into what really is, most alive for them. That felt really beautiful and so important because I think from that kind of place of connection, you can go and do the daring stuff, because you sort of feel, and I think maybe that's why my kind of own energy of daring and chutzpah is coming from at the start of this year. And I really didn't feel it sort of a week ago. I'm feeling it, I'm feeling it now. Like last week, I used very different words to describe where I was sort of emotionally. But I feel like that's where it's coming from. I'm kind of really now starting to feel or see the results of that support that I certainly received as being one of the facilitators or the guides on that journey. But we always said we're participating. It's not here. We're not here as teachers, or we're totally in the process. And and I really feel and I believe that's what was kind of received across all crew members.
I think it's really fascinating to reflect on that idea of being crew. You know, that's at the heart of becoming crew. There's something about how the thread through our work weaves between everybody. So you're not just, if you like, you're not just stepping into service on the spaceship Earth. It's actually that process of weaving together that creates the courage and the it's confidence, but not in a sense of I know what's happening, but it's that willingness to step into the uncertainty and the mystery of these times. And actually, I think that's what I feel one of the things that we've been learning is that sense of actually it requires that weaving back into community, because that's so lost. And actually the time that it requires to do that weaving into community is huge. It's like it's all too often it's like, well, we're going to, we'll do an icebreaker round and we'll, share something about ourselves and that's it. We've got the community. But actually that real tenderness of weaving just takes time. And it's only through that you can really form a crew with enough connection and therefore the capacity to be in the mystery that we're in. And I suppose it's a learning of mine is quite how necessary and how much focus is required on doing that in these times, because we've lost those forms of connection in our everyday life. We don't have those threads of connection. Typically, we live in these separate boxes, most of us separate from everybody else, and we've lost those everyday connections on those really meaningful everyday things that we do. So I think that feels to me so important, is that it's this becoming crew. It's like weaving connection and taking the time to do it. And through that, as you say, you have the confidence, you have the chutzpah to kind of go and do these things that are so urgently necessary. And I think that's another thing I'm reflecting on now. It's this sense of where it's this urge, this sense between what we're doing here and dreaming and resting and really leaning into, not leaping straight into this deep level of planning that's going to churn out the next big thing, but also sitting with the discomfort that kind of says, yeah, but also we're in these urgent times. And so all of those things, how do we take the time so that when we do act, we're doing it from a place of real strength and acting in our own power, supported and connected by our crew.
Yeah, and it's something I think over the years, what I was witnessing with the work I was doing, which was often about outward work with, brands, organizations, foundations, NGOs, whatever, multiple groups with really good intention to want to sort of solve stuff, solve things, problems, and extraordinary sort of possibilities that emerged through a lot of that work. But what I was always noticing, and probably on my own journey as well, was this lack of going in, exploring the inner crisis and the inner capacity to therefore go and to participate in this change. So a lot of it's still very much like, again, the intention, the solution, the campaign, the thing, all good, but very rarely any time to really go, well, we're part of this thing. So what's going on in me and what's going on in you? What's going on in this landscape around us, and what do we really know and what do we not know? And that depth that's being called for is always often seen as, again, or at least in my experience, seen as just like, yeah, but it's a bit deep, a bit spiritual, a bit, we've got bigger things to. But ultimately, as things have got more and more absurd, the damage and the division and the complexity and the chaos of what is going on, it's becoming really clear, I think, that without working at this deeper level, without creating the space and the investment that, this is what we should be, we need lots of things, but if we're not investing in ourselves as people, you know what I mean, as human beings, how can we possibly create these regenerative futures that are being talked about without that level of, regeneration from the inside and with each other and with the world around us? I guess going back to this question, as we started with the messiness, the experimentation of this work, it is very difficult to start in a solid play. You know what I mean? It's an inquiry. It is an inquiry, and hopefully it's starting to sort of shape itself a bit. But yeah, it's just, I feel very, very, very certain of that, and yet it's still, again, in my own experience, and others may have different experiences, but I still feel it's still, even now, even with all the obvious brokenness, that it's still often seen as maybe not as urgent or as important, or do you know what I mean?
A bit fluffy.
Bit fluffy, bit kind of like, yeah, but we've got to get on, and and I know there's a lot that has contributed to that story. There's a lot that keeps this there, but I guess what I'm saying, when I think back now on the year of last year, the some of the work we started to do with the team at BTP, the work we've been doing with the community solos, is very clear when you experience it. What you see and experience is tells a very different story, in terms of, to you saying, Mark, that is then creating the capacity for people to really step into the difficult stuff. And my sense is always, without this type of work going on in parallel, right? Because I think that's the crew element here as well, is it's about participating in the change. This isn't just sitting in our own depth of, do you know what I mean? And our own kind of spiritual explorations. This is about, really evolving ourselves in order to do this, to confront this really, 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 like, times that we've never experienced as a species. It's like there are no answers to this. So I've witnessed that with this work, like what this can help people to go on and start to do in their lives. And I think that's what's exciting for me. It's a sort of, when you start to weave co-creation into this work alongside these journeys, then it gets quite exciting.
And we've been talking quite a lot about how do we allow this work to follow the sort of wheel of the year and the energetic qualities of the year. And it seems to me through that, like, nature's always doing that beautiful dance again between growth and depth. And I remember when we were seeding out the community solo, one of the sort of ideas I was playing with, this idea of trading growth for depth, and this idea that we're addicted to growth, that we need to be doing more, we need to be acting faster because we're really, we're really in the shit. So we've got to do more. We've got to grow this, our action. We've got to grow our impact. And I suppose doing that was, as we were seeding that, it was in October, November, and there's a real sense of, how do we switch out of that idea of growing?
I can't grow in November.
I can't grow in November. Exactly that. And it's like there's a time for deepening. There's a time for depth. And if I've really taken with a tree that we saw yesterday. Basically, the tree had become river, and it was surrounded by this raging torrent of floodwater, and it was standing firm. I was like, how on earth can it be doing that? And of course, it's only because it's invested the time in its depth. And so if you look at everything out there, all those trees out there on Dartmoor today, all their energy, all their attention is in the roots. It's not growing, it's deepening. And yet there will be a time come April, come May, where everything it's doing is around growth, where it's outward, it's above ground, where everything is in beautiful, abundant emergence. And I just think there's something that I'm just so fascinated by and curious about, how we can apply those same. There is a time for deepening, and it's only through that practice have we rooted enough, have we grounded enough to do the urgent work that we need to do. And I just think that's so important. So sometimes you just trade your growth for depth, and then you come back and you use it when energetically that is the right thing to do. And one of the things we were playing with yesterday was, how do we design both the things that we offer out into the world, but also the way that we do it in that way, so that actually it's entirely right for us to be having these dreaming sessions in January, but it doesn't feel like it would be right for us to do the same thing in July. So how do we honour that in the way that we organise? as a trio, and then the way that we put things out.
There's something in well, when you were chatting, Dan, about this idea of the importance of inner work that kind of needs to happen so that we can step or continue to be stepping more fully into service. And there's something in what you were talking about in terms of trading growth for depth. I'm just struck by like sometimes in life it's not your choosing, you're being forced to trade growth for depth. And I mean, I think I'm speaking for the three of us, like we all had our kind of like unravelings, and in some ways we're sort of forced in certain moments of our lives to go very deep. Like, you know, I certainly felt like I wasn't choosing that. It was kind of happening to me. I was kind of like being pulled down. And obviously when that happens to people, then you have the experience of like, I need to go and do this inner work. And I guess I'm just quite interested in this idea. Well, when I look back at sort of like my life and my work to that point, like what has led me to a place where I needed to go really, really deep, and because there was no, when you get to a point in life when you think, okay, I'm at the threshold and I've been resisting stepping over it for some time, and now something is just pulling me in, and I'm quite interested in this on an individual level, but also like collective level, because it really feels to me like that's where we are as people, as civilization, and what's on the other side of that threshold.
Yeah, it's that sense of, in those moments, so resistant are we to step over the threshold that we've pulled through it. We fall
quite violently
through the trapdoor.
Yeah.
And we talk about thresholds a lot and portals into other ways of being, and I'm fascinated about the idea of the conscious decision to step across the threshold into another way of being, into another way of being in service, and how in our life, in our work, we can create, I guess it's a ritual of noticing when you're at that moment of profound change in life, when you're being called into service, when you're being called into something different, and then you create a conscious threshold that you step over. And I just, the word threshold is used so often, I feel, these days, and yet the root of it is so beautiful and wonderful. This idea of it being the place where, in the village, you would have been sorting the wheat from the chaff, and you would then, in that process of sorting, you'd be left with a pile of the stuff that is useful, the grain, and the stuff that is not useful to you, and how the threshold would form between the useful and the things that are no longer useful to you. And when you look at it like that, it's that sense of how do we create those spaces where we recognize that we're going to step into now, recognizing that we need to leave behind things that are no longer useful to us, and step into a future where we're working with the things that are providing us with what the nourishment, if you like, of what comes out of the threshold in that traditional sense, what we actually need to nourish us and provide us with a sustenance to go forward. And I just think those thresholds are so important. To see a threshold like that is to create places where you're the things that are useful to you and the things that are no longer useful to you, and consciously stepping up from one to the other. It's just such a powerful thing, and it feels like it fits at right at the heart of what we're doing.
We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. How bonkers is that? You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
It's just simple things that signal a shift. Do you remember when we took the BTP crew out onto the 8-hour moor walk. Do you remember? And we got everyone up at 4 a.m. I think it was. It's about 10 of us, wasn't it? I think. So, but we'd prepared them, and we gave everyone a hot drink, and then we asked everyone to be silent for the next hour. We were going to get them onto a minibus and drive up onto the moor. Do you remember?
It's really some really vibey music as well. That minibus.
But even before we got on the bus, we were burning some incense, and we created some candles down that path. And we asked them to just and you have that lovely way of how did you put it? I think it was just the darkness moving into the sun rising. Do you remember?
I do, and it's all those moments that's moving from the ordinary reality into non-ordinary reality that I think is so, like, we're so in this ordinary reality. It's always on this like constant noise, and there's something that we did at that moment of threshold, which basically create a non-ordinary reality, taking away from that, and it's through there that the change happens. So you step across in a non-ordinary place into a much more, on the other side of that threshold is an intentional place. It's a place of possibility, and away from all of the other stuff. So it's like you're leaving behind all of that other stuff, which is no longer useful to you. The noise, the social media, all of that stuff that takes up so much of our capacity in our brain.
The emails.
Step away from the emails. They're no longer useful to you. And you're stepping consciously into this new, non-ordinary reality, because that's where the change is coming from.
Mm. And it was amazing, isn't it? When we got, I'm just sorry, I'm going to riff on this bit for a bit long because I'm just remembering it, and we got onto that bus, didn't we? And they totally played the game. They sat in silence for an hour, which is in itself is quite interesting.
Yeah,
to be a group of you in a minibus, in darkness at dawn, driving somewhere you don't really know onto the moors, but everyone played. Everyone was quiet, silence. And then we got up we parked up onto the moor, and we walked them up. Do you remember? The sun was just starting to rise. And that approach to going back to the threshold, that manifestation, albeit small and, improvised and whatever, and, the invitation to open the imagination, because we were inviting them really early on just to imagine. But it set that context for that day, didn't it? That walk, everything was the level of openness that team had, and the level of which they played back to us after, the level of insight they learnt about each other through things like vulnerable sharing, which again was their words, learning things about each other that they'd never really learnt about, although they work with each other constantly in a dynamic workplace. These quite simple practices and invitations to, like you say, to let go of what we perceive as essential and normal. Stuff happens. And a bit like with the community solo, we should speak a bit to the community solo, because that in itself was a sort of there was obviously a big threshold moment in that, but just how that came about. Because do you remember we were sort of thinking about, we'd just done it, we'd been out, hadn't we? The three of us had done a solo down late summer, early autumn.
Yeah, September. Yeah,
September, just down the valley, just a couple of miles down the Dart River in the gorge down here. Yeah.
And it was like, again, that kind of remembering just how powerful that can be.
That's true, because we did it. We went on it without an intention of that being the offering. I think we did it just as part of our own process,
our
of
own practice.
Oh, we're doing this thing, becoming crew. Let's have a solo and kind of like set some intentions for this work. And I remember we did it, and it was like, oh, that's really good, isn't it? It's really powerful. Maybe that's the work, like offering up kind of our own practice. And for me, the connecting thread between all of those things is, I guess in some ways, it's the power of ritual that allows us to set conditions that like suspend the rules of your everyday game for a moment. And when I think about actually my work again, that there's a there's a thread of connection because when I used to do sort of like brand strategy, and then I, became sort of a workshop designer and workshop facilitator. Like that was the thing that I really loved, that we can create a temporary space where we say to each other, I know you know me as this person, and I know I always talk like this or I always show up like this, but I'm going to put it to the side for a moment and we're just going to do something really fucking different, and I can try something different on. And I think that like there's such power in this idea that I can try on, like rehearse, experiment with a different way of being. And I think that only happens when you create, like when you use ritual to create conditions for people to suddenly, I have permission to be different. And that's where real...
It's like a dressing up box.
Huh?
It's like a dressing up box.
There you go.
That's what we need, dressing up boxes.
That's next up on becoming crew.
Yeah. Just a giant dressing up box. But it makes me also reflect on, because, when we did that accidental prototyping of it, we specifically came to a place that we know, in this beautiful place far from the madding crowd on Dartmoor. But actually, in a sense, whilst, then we went away and we thought, maybe we should design an experience where we bring people to this place. And then actually, what became really clear to us is actually what was interesting about this was the element of place, and that it's not necessarily about bringing people into these, as pristine as Dartmoor is, despite its man's influence on this land, it has that element. It's still far away from where most people are, and that's why kind of the birth of Community Solo as it became in November was actually about how do we support people to find that connection with their place, and that started to feel really, really interesting. And then when we actually got into it and we started to do the Community Solo, how it felt even more interesting. And then, so we'd had those 3 connecting things where actually our focus was on connecting one another to form that crew relationship, and then practices to start to build that relationship with their place that they call home. And then when we actually went out and we did the medicine walk collectively, we had people, walking in the woods and the forests on the edgelands of Berlin, and in around The Hague, and in Denmark, and within the city of Bristol. It's like we had these people that were just deepening themselves into place, and how that felt so right, and this sense that if we're going to be in service, this idea that we have at the heart of Becoming Crew, to use our work in service to all life, actually that needs to start not by being in service to a place far away from us, and that there's this sense of what would it be like to be in service just to we talked didn't we, about this sort of about really getting to know the place that we live, and I go back to Gary Snyder, who's I guess an eco-activist from the US, and Gary talks about this idea of becoming famous for 5 miles rather than for 5 minutes, and it just feels so ripe. What would it be like to draw a circle 5 miles away? Could even be less than 5 miles. For so many of us, it could be just like a mile radius around your home, and say, I'm going to be in service to this little bit, and get to know it, get to feel like I'm a part of it, get to understand its rhythms and its nuances and the way it looks on a in a particular time of year when the sun shines in that particular way over that hill. That's what I think we all need to be in service to. And that's, I guess, as we played that out and experimented with that through the Community Solo, it just felt so very right to hear those stories of people deepening into their place and getting to know them in new and interesting ways. And it feels so important, this new relationship with place, so that we become like, this is, it's fascinating, this idea of us going into the more than human world and it feeling like that we might feel at home with it. But what would it be like if actually we spent so much time in these places we call home that the more than human world actually starts to recognize us and starts to understand us and our ways of working and our ways of being? And that's just, imagine that actually we just become so deeply ingrained into a place that the the local badgers and the roadiers know about you and when you're likely to show up and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that feels like you get into that, it's a proper safari.
It is, and we should just to sort of summarise, if you're listening, is this idea of the community solo that Mark's been chatting, so that, as Mark said, how could we sort of facilitate, guide a solo experience, but do it online and help people connect to that place where they're actually from, rather than trying to ship a bunch of people to a certain place. And so that's what the community solo idea was birthed, and it's 5 weeks roughly. It's about 4 evenings of an evening a week. What did we say last night? It's like 5 evenings and a crazy weekend walk at the end of it. It's kind of like that. And because of the winter dynamic when we started, we sort of shifted rather than a kind of sitting solo, a sort of solo just sort of in, often in a spot somewhere. We've been sort of riffing on the ancient practices of the medicine walk, which is to go out onto a landscape and to ramble, to wander and seek medicine, to seek kind of insight to big questions or big intentions. And so that was the idea of the program, and it was pretty mind blowing, I have to say. And we also, as Evva said, we've been guiding it, the three of us, but also participating in it. So we're taking part in it as well. And we should talk a little bit about it, because it was, for each of us, I think it was surprising what was possible, what happened to the group that came with us on that journey, and just sort of how it's impacted us. Because I was looking at some of the feedback that people have given us of recent, and there was a lot of talk about love and care. And that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Those sort of qualities in these times. People talking about spaces where they felt that, because I don't know, I have this thing again, like this there's human beings, like this kind of love, this lightness is in us. It's in us. It's just I'm convinced we're born with it in us, but for whatever reason, for multiple reasons. These times you kind of think, oh God, where is it? But it's there, and I think something about this community so has been about, again, sort of trying to sort of create a space where that can come through, that can sort of open up. But I was also just from personal thing, blown away by the walks, the medicine walk, and people we timed it all. Some folks went out for 2-3 hours, some went out for 12, some went out for 5, 6. I mean, it was a real mix, but it was, medicine was received, right? Everyone came back with pretty extraordinary insight.
Yeah, you had a pre-wild ride yourself, didn't you?
I did have a very wild ride, yeah. And I for me it was as we were starting that cohort off. Yeah, my dad had heart failure. So I was like, I remember like dropping a note into you guys saying, I'm not going to, I'm going to struggle to be on the opening session. He was in ICU. So I was in ICU with him up in Uxbridge. So I missed the opening session. But that whole timing for me was, with my dad, was he going to make it? And so I was coming into that, from the second week onwards, and what I was finding was that community, that sharing that was going on, that exploration that was going on in that community, and listening to each other and helping each other shape the sort of questions that were sort of coming up, and preparing ourselves for this medicine walk at the end of, which was just before the solstice. So I found that quite at the time it was really helping me, with some roots actually in what was massively turbulent time. And my question was all around, when I went out for the walk on the Sunday, my question at the time was all around this, how to navigate these for me, darkness, challenging times, which has fundamentally been a question I've been carrying for a long, long time. But I have moments where I find I have overwhelm. You know, I have overwhelm from, you know, the bigger stuff that's going on in the world, and then at the end of last year, very, very sort of close things in the family, and culminate with my dad's illness and situation, and so when I went out onto the medicine walk on the Sunday, you know, I was very much about how do I find that, how do I keep that light, how do I find that light within, going through these dark times. How can I remember to find to seek the light as well, to hold that as well, you know, which I think I ended up was like learning to dance through the darkness and the fog sort of thing. But I went out towards dusk, you know, because of that, because that's where my head was. I thought, you know what, I need to go out. I need to go into the darkness. That's what I have to do. And I also went somewhere near me. I felt again, I needed to go somewhere I didn't know as well. Mm-hmm. And that's what I loved about this process, the sharing of that with that community. So the comfort, the courage to hold that question, which I think a crew helps you. They help you be okay with that. You know what I mean? Not even okay, just be really
present to it?
Present with it. Yeah, like really hold that question, you know. Fucking go for it. Do you know what I mean? I think that's what a crew helps you do. But I knew I needed to go. I knew I needed to go somewhere that I wasn't familiar with to really explore that question of how to be with challenge and darkness. And so it was so surreal. And it had snowed that day. Do you remember?
Yeah,
this is when I said,
yeah.
and a lot.
Yeah.
And it, you know, so I went out on this snowy dusk kickoff and to this wood that's on this hillside of Bath, and it's steep and it's gnarly and it was getting dark as I went in, and I had such a profound experience where I really pushed myself to my edges of comfort and discomfort and fear. You know, it's hard to sort of articulate, but do you know what I mean? But there's a sort of like there's a different energy that was driving me. It wasn't a rational energy. You know, I wasn't going, oh, I need to do this, or I was just drawn to I just went where I felt I needed to go. And I came back from that thing, and obviously we had the virtual gathering, the return, which was amazing, and all of those emotions. But yeah, and then the next day, you know, I got a call from the hospital saying, your dad's hasn't got long to go, you know, get here, you know, and I drove up to London, and my brother got over, and we were with my dad, you know, all the way through till he died on Monday afternoon. But there was something, as I said, I tried to articulate this recently, that community solo, that medicine walk, that whole thing, you know, it happened to land while this was going on. But it really, really not just helped me get through it, it grounded me, but it's continuing. The medicine is continuing. It's helping me. It's really helped me. Just sort of, again, I come back to navigate. I'm okay. You know, I'm sort of, you know, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of processing still going on, but I feel like that process gave me medicine that I really needed and continues to do so. So yeah, that's a sales pitch for Community Solo. If you're interested, you don't have to be in a situation where you're being confronted with these kind of stuff. But anyway,
but I think for me, what you're speaking to is like the importance of the connection that we formed over the sessions that we had online, and then this honing of this question, this intention, this thing that you're working with. It's not, and you know, and it's not that you need to go out on this medicine walk with, like, you know, this sense of what is my life, what is it that I'm here for? It's although, you know,
it could be that,
but actually often it's just like that sense of right here, right now. What is it that what's most alive for me at this moment? And then in naming it to the crew, you're giving it weight, you're giving it depth, and then in creating a threshold, then you're saying, and you're stepping out of this out of your current reality into this non-ordinary reality, and you're handing over, I suppose, agency to the living world, and you're basically saying, this is where I am, this is what I'm living with, over to you. So when you went into that deep dark quarry and the fog and the snow and all of that, into the darkness, that's where the medicine comes from, because you're shedding the control, you're shedding all of what you felt you knew, and you're saying, I'm open, and that takes courage and stuff, and that's where the crew comes in, because it was wonderful, like, to reflect back on it and go, this idea that there was at broadly the same time as I was out in my little bit further downstream from here, where I live in Devon, on the banks of the River Dart at dawn, knowing that somewhere out in the world, there was David doing his thing out in the Hague at exactly the same time, having completely a different bit of medicine, but the medicine nonetheless was just such a wonderful feeling to be a part of, and that the medicine I needed was very different to the medicine that you needed, but it was medicine that I'd called in, and that the universe was provided. But because we'd done the work to clarify the question, to create the threshold, and then to speak the intention, and I always go back to this wonderful thing that I learned from one of our teachers, Dan, Chris Salisbury of Wildwise, and I remember him saying the root of the word abracadabra is not, it's not this sense of I'm going to pull a rabbit out of a hat. It's actually a word from the ancient Aramaic language that says, as I speak, so I create. And that's that practice of saying both to your crew to be witnessed, and then saying to the threshold to be witnessed by the more than human world. As I speak, so I create, and you're creating a possibility in saying that thing. So actually, getting used to speaking your intention out loud to be witnessed by it. There's magic in all that stuff, and I'm so glad we were able to experiment with it, and with that lovely little first crew on the community solo. It felt really rich and ripe and right for these times.
For me, it's interesting hearing you talk, Dan, about your experience. It's such a clear example also of how this element of stepping into service falls into all of that, because as you said, or I heard you say, so that was the support to kind of allow you or help you move through some like really challenging things that were going on in your life. And then, well, I can certainly feel that in you and hear that in you, that like you've come into this year with this sense of like, yeah, I want to step up my voice in podcast. Like you're here, you're able to be stepping into service. So yeah, I'm just kind of like left with the power of when you receive medicine. It's not for you, it's through you. It's through you for us all. Like, we all have a stake in you feel like being able to move through this stuff, because then, yeah, we're all able to kind of like receive what needs to come through you. And I just find it really mind-blowing, the shift between that medicine is not for me, it's through me. Yeah, it's a really beautiful kind of like embodied way to experience it for me, because I'm like, yeah, I'm excited what Dan's going to do with his podcast.
The medicine is all ours.
Yeah, well, yeah, totally.
Thank God,
yeah. And I certainly feel like that because my medicine walk, I remember I was getting quite angry during this medicine walk. I was getting a bit pissed off, a bit like, I don't know, a bit uncomfortable. I remember that day very, very clearly, because it was the first day of snow in Bath, and I've woken up to this like a really eerie landscape. It was all like someone dusted flour or something all across the world, and it all just did the outlines of gnarly kind of bare trees. And like I have some frames from that day, which is just this grey sort of background and dark trees across it. So it really felt like I was stepping into a very different the threshold element was really, really strong. And I remember getting quite restless, quite angry, quite uncomfortable during the walk. It wasn't kind of like a lovely sort of skipping ramble. There was some efforting in that walk. I mean, my relationship to winter has changed over the years, but I still find it like there's a kind of a loneliness that can settle in for me at this time of the year. And a bit of darkness. And I really feel that like during that walk, I was able to sort of like connect to the element of anger that feels really generative for me. In maybe particularly in the context of like, being a woman getting angry, and like, how does that look like, and what can that power, what can that generate for me if I can connect to like a healthy expression of anger, and also knowing that anger can somehow be seen and be supported in community. So in a community of people that we journeyed with during that community solo, I'm getting a real sense that I am only kind of just now truly started to integrate that walk. And I feel it. I just feel it in my body. I feel the memory of how it felt to sort of, get a bit angry and not everything being not being pretty, but then me being able to share that with community, be witnessed in that. And I feel that it's liberated something in me. Which again, I feel like it offers me an opportunity to then continue with the work that I feel is really important and called for in the world.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
I think there's something really important there about how the way that the medicine is dispensed is not always seeking an immediate response from us. And, in Dan's case, that sense of there was an immediacy because you were right at this deeply acute part. But actually for many of us, that we're thankfully not actually in that deeply acute life or death situation that you are faced with. And I think it's just that sense of, for so many of these experiences out there where we're receiving medicine from the living world, actually to overthink what we received is a dangerous thing to do. And actually it's about like just slowly integrating it. And we, in our as we integrated our medicine experiences with the crew, both that evening and our return, and then our final session on the following week, it was been really clear that we don't make sense of this work straight away. This making sense of this work might happen next week, it might happen next month, more than likely slowly emerges over the course of years and years and years. And I think it's just that there's a real danger in our culture of trying to make sense of all our experiences. Must try and make that make sense. And
what do I do with it?
Yeah, what am I going to do with this medicine? And actually, there's a trust again, isn't it? That this medicine is working, and it will emerge in me in some form.
It's the tension because it's so countercultural towards the culture that wants now and answers and solutions, to the sort of like, well, let's just how to trust that what happened to me through this, there is insight and there is something going on that I need to sit with and trust. Well, I guess again that's why one of the things you remember last week we were talking about this need for ongoing. Is there a role for sort of ongoing support in this work, which I guess is part. Some people would call it integration support. There is this question. What is a sort of light touch way of supporting the ongoing, like you say, this thing, you're sensing that experience for you, that walk for you and Semenowicz just maybe starting to You're starting to sense some of it, some of the intelligence that you were left with. Because I think and I think it is like touch, but it is a question, as a live question for me. How do you keep community going that come through these experiences? Because a lot of what we're playing with this work is experiential, isn't it? We're only really able to unlearn and learn through experience that we feel beyond just our minds, that we can feel that something, there's a different way of knowing the world or ourselves or each other that has occurred, and those experiences happen, and then there is this question of how to keep working with that feeling. You know what I mean? That integration of that stuff, not through a Slack channel.
Yeah, not through a Slack channel. And it is that sense we've been, this idea of becoming crew on Spaceship Earth. It's not that you're crew for as long as you're part of the program. Because we're all crew on Spaceship Earth, whether you do a community solo or whatever else it is with us. It's that sense of how do you then build or maintain, support community without it defaulting to we're going to create a Slack channel that you can be a part of. And that might be part of the answer, but it's not the answer. It's like how do we nurture the communities so that we're all, I don't know, encouraging, supporting, holding one another,
particularly in this idea of sort of decentralized, distributed places, people in places. Because again, the sort of I always think about the old models of change that I've worked with a lot of the time has been how do we scale this thing? How do you scale the change? And it's very blunt and it's very sort of mechanistic, But this is messy human shifts, which requires a quality of attention that scale doesn't do, you know. And so yeah. But it does feel really just so vital, and can only look at the future and think will become more vital to support this evolution.
I'm thinking of Spaces for Not Knowing, actually, in that context. Yeah, Spaces for Not Knowing is a pretty mad idea and an offering in some ways, but I guess the intention behind it was to convene people and experiment with, like, what would it feel like to be together and be really present to the fact that we are living in times of great mystery, and actually any kind of certainties we used, or seeming certainties that we used to, like, build our cultures and our structures and our economic systems are really, they're myths. They're not certainties at all. And, like, there's so much stuff from our everydays that, I'm going to speak for myself, that from my everyday that I've accepted as common sense that just doesn't make sense anymore at all to me. It's not, it doesn't.
Can you give us an example?
Educational system, healthcare system. Yeah, I mean, most of reality doesn't make, I've spent.
I remember you talking. Do you remember? I remember you talking about, as a, on your journey as, working as a brand strategist, for example, totally. And how you might have felt, and it was just really interesting the way you used to speak. Yeah,
about good whatever 10 years of my work didn't make sense to me. Still doesn't make sense to me, But yeah, I remember very, very vividly feeling like I have this job that is kind of deemed as like a cool job or a desirable job. I should be really happy. I should be really proud, and it's actually something I've been working towards. And yet here I am, and I feel like I'm doing something that doesn't make sense to me anymore. Everything about that industry actually is made up. It doesn't speak to anything that is real experience of life for me. And I also always had this thought that, there's a term that I'd often sort of hear is stage managing. We need to stage manage this situation. We need to, and that's part of advertising, right? This is kind of selling things, of course, is making them desirable. And there's such violence that I feel happens when we get into this groove that our job is somehow making undesirable or unneeded things desirable and needed. And so I ended up sort of operating in a place in a system where, I was working on projects that I just felt nobody needs this. I don't need this. And yet I'm sitting at this meeting saying how exciting it is. And
it's very hard to speak to what you're talking about when you're in that context.
Oh God,
right?
it is, because you just think, well, I was thinking, I guess I'm the mad one. I remember like looking around the room and thinking, is anyone going to catch my eye and be like, yeah, no, I'm thinking that as well. But no, but it just doesn't happen, because it's very, very difficult.
There's power in the room, isn't there?
Well, there's power, huge amounts of power in the room on so many different levels. There's a whole lot to unpack there, and yet, it's also, it comes back to what we said. We are the system. We are plugged into the economic system, and for some people, it's a lot. They have the capacity, the opportunity to challenge some of that stuff. And it's not just through sheer sort of like, power of the spirit. It's also like, your economic circumstances, your family circumstances. There's a lot wrapped into why it's very, very difficult to challenge it and speak to it. And part of it is also because, and I remember that voice very strongly in me, is actually coming back to the not knowing, because I knew I didn't want to do that anymore, but I didn't know what I wanted to do or what I could do. And that this idea of not knowing being quite paralyzing, I think it's part of the design of the system. You have to have an answer, otherwise don't bother challenging it. Unless you can give me an alternative, a working alternative, well, we're just going to keep doing what we've always done. Yeah, keep quiet.
Pipe down.
So I think that's why the spaces for not knowing are so exciting, because it's like, well, how does it feel to be like, I don't know, but it's not going to stop me from being here, from challenging the stuff that I know doesn't work anymore. I don't have to have the answer. In fact, I know for a fact I don't. The salvation isn't going to come from one single person. Certainly not going to come from me, but it may just come from us saying, that does not make sense anymore. I'm being present to the reality that this is not making sense, and I don't know.
And it feels really radical, that idea of saying, I just simply don't know. And I'm okay with that ish. I'm sitting with it, and that invitation that we have within the space for not knowing, to say, and no one here is going to solve that for you. Nobody here is going to coach you to the answer, but we're just going to go, I hear you, and actually realize that a field opens up between us where we all actually share much of the not knowing. So practically speaking, we do them online. They're a couple of hours long, and it's just an invitation to come and sit with one another and express your not knowing that the outcome of it is not that you're going to be fixed, not that you're going to be solved, if only. Or judged, because we all don't know. It's the expression of not, and it feels so countercultural and really radical in these days, where actually we're all being encouraged to kind of share. Here's what I've learned. Here's 10 things that I've learned last year that I now know that I didn't know, and the culture is like, here are 10 things that I absolutely don't know anything about, and that challenge me. It feels so important.
But they've been surprising, haven't they? Again, we've done 3 of them. I think they've been surprising on so many fronts. And the hunch, I think, we also had a hunch. It's not a hunch. It's something I think we've experienced many times over the years, that when we allow ourselves to unknow or not know, and we allow ourselves, therefore, to be in a space where no one's jumping in, with answers and solutions and fixes, but we're hearing deep unknowingness. That can be extraordinarily generative, like that it can open up something where other ideas and questions start to emerge, which are that have regenerative potential, questions or perspectives which are not being heard because of the culture of knowingness. You know. And I think we experienced that, haven't we, on these sessions, and watching different people come to them again from all over the place and being drawn in for different reasons. You know, because we've started these sessions now with this question. You know, what? Just first of all, just around invitation to, like, you know, what brought you here? You know, what brought you to this session? Because that in itself is interesting to understand how people are experiencing, you know, variants and versions of what you just spoke to, Evva. But, you know, because it shows up in different ways for people, you know, it's not there's no one way of not knowing. it's a extraordinarily sort of rich place of exploration, and what can come through that. But I've been really surprised, again, really, you know, in a beautiful way, what comes through those sessions, and again that they feel there's energy in them. I don't feel drained, whereas I can often feel so drained in a knowing space, you know, where we've got to know things and have answers and ideas and make shit happen. You know, that's so draining at times. But actually, a space for not knowing can be really vital.
I think, like, if someone asked me, like, oh, what would I get from it? You know, why do you want me to come to that sort of mad gathering of people? Because I think there's something in, like, you know, this term that I think is often used in these kind of spaces, to sit with something. That can feel really passive for a lot of people, especially like in these urgent times. They're like, what, do you want me to fucking sit with something? There's no time for sitting. But what I feel with a lot of this stuff, but particularly speaking about spaces for not knowing, is there's a liberation, there's a real sense of unstuckness that happens in the body when I allow myself to be in the not knowing, and to accept that, like, my not knowing will not stop me from stepping into service. Because I think that's where the paralysis often happened for me, was, oh, I don't know, so I can't do anything. Someone smarter than me, someone in a position of more power than me, they hold the answers. It's not me, you know, I can only do so little. So, you know, that whole narrative of, and it comes back to perfectionism, right? You know, the whole culture of white supremacy is based on, you have to have the perfect answer. If it's not perfect, don't bother, you know, that is not your space to be doing it, and it's not your, and that's wrapped in a sense of who holds the power and who holds the responsibility for change, for enacting transformation. So, yeah, with spaces for not, I mean, there's a lot there, but for me, fundamentally, it's about an embodied practice of allowing yourself to keep moving through things, despite or amongst the not knowing, the confusion, the despair, the really difficult things that are there. And we're not creating a sort of a really happy, positive story that people can get behind. No, like, there's going to be a lot of gnarly bits in there, and yet we keep moving through it. That's, to me, the vitality of it.
And last thing, for me, just on, as you're again listening to you there, again thinking about at least what, you know, my limited understanding of the more than human world, but I see this again, like this sort of the not knowing as sort of essential part of the sort of decaying and composting required, you know, to actually speak to the things that don't make any sense, or that you have you don't understand, or you just have no,
or that you don't want to look at, that are in inverted commas ugly or revolt,
Right.
all of that stuff.
all of that stuff, by being able to speak to that, and again, not to be judged or not to have answers, but just to speak to it, just to sort of allow it to come out, is a letting go. It is a sort of a decay. For me, it's a bit like, it is a rotting down, a composting down, a letting go, part of a sort of breakdown. That if new, different forms of growth and ideas and stories will come through that, then stuff needs to be spoken to. So I do think it's fascinating how, by experimenting with some of what we're learning through some of this, and we've been talking a bit about this year ahead, and what are we going to take forward? What are we going to let go of? We tried quite a lot last year, and even just thinking about how we are recognizing the power in these community solo experiences that could be really powerful for teams, in organizations to take part in, whether they're in a single organization, whether they're distributed global workers, whatever it might be, teams that don't spend time together, but actually the power in these kind of experiences. And also, we talked about these spaces for not knowing as a practice that we could also introduce into teams, into organizations, whatever, because again, there's real potential, possibility in not knowing, and creating the culture where that's okay, and that's where we recognise there's value in having some space for that every so often. It's not every day. You don't want to speak about your unknowingness all day long. That just wouldn't work.
It's tempting.
Exactly. I've been there. It doesn't work. But you do. But again, like, what are these new practices that are going to bring forth new forms of organizations, new forms of ways of people working together, of living together, of creating new structures and systems that work for people? These feel like valuable tools, practices, as part of a spread of things, to be playing with. So I'm quite excited by some of that. So how are we feeling? I was thinking, we've been rambling. But I was just thinking, like, maybe just sort of thinking about how we're all feeling now, mid-Jan, thinking about the months ahead. What are we tuning into?
Where are we at?
Yeah, where are we at?
Where are we at after all this?
Where are you at? Where are you all at?
On a really practical level, I'm really at. We had this fascinating thing yesterday, as we said at the beginning of the conversation, about the switch that we made when we moved from this dark, rainy, quiet space that we created in the morning, and then what happened when we went out onto the moor. I'm itching now to get out. It's still bright, showers moving through on the strong wind, but really quite a bright and breezy day. I'm feeling the need to actually go and take, not necessarily this conversation, but our conversations back out onto the land. Just because of what that might do. But I'm really curious where we got to yesterday afternoon. I think it's really still alive for me. Having done all that composting that we did and the sharing of what we've been learning, as soon as we stepped out there onto the moor, it was I think, I'm pretty sure the threshold word was the word that Evva used, which was chutzpah, which feels like it's the word of our time together. But it was that sense of it's that sense of a need and a feeling to dream into something bigger. And again, really being careful and tender with this idea of growth. It's not about growth, but it's actually about something that feels really audacious about this work of becoming crew. And I'm feeling really alive to that. And the light is really just gently starting to grow again out there in the world. And I just feel like where my energy's at, as it starts to grow into February, March, April, as the sort of spring starts to kick into gear, what it might look like to create a longer form experience for becoming crew that really allows us to deepen into this work as a crew. So I'm kind of feeling the need this afternoon, right here, right now, is to kind of take the dreaming back outside and see what the wind has to tell us about that.
We've got something cooking. It's coming. We're not quite ready to tell you exactly what it is, but it's coming.
Yeah. It just needs a name.
No, yeah, we were going to sleep on the name.
But I just before you jump in, because it was your word about daring. That's this sense of, like, you know, we've got some really, really interesting experiences now that we're working with and shaping, and it feels like that you know, that autumn wintering work with the community solos, and there's a real life version that we want to bring out as well, and you know, offering these up to organisations. But we've got something more daring cooking, and that was the way you were putting it. It was just really the chutzpah, but the daringness of feeling of where we're heading with this towards, you know, when the spring starts to come and the summer, and that is that feels like the time where we need to be, where we want to be, upping our the intention of this work, the possibility of it, and how we can invite a bigger cohort into it.
Yeah, and I think in that daring, there's for me, there's a level of discomfort, and we always say that the sort of consciously held discomfort is like absolutely crucial for these processes. I think really truly like transformational happens unless you kind of like go to these places that feel gnarly and uncomfortable and dark, and so for me, this idea of daring actually is there's a part of me that knows that feels uncomfortable for me, and that's a signal for me that actually that's kind of where, yeah, go on, Evva, like that's your orientation. And it's funny because when we were speaking like a week ago before here, and I said to you, like, I actually feeling like beginning of the year, like I felt like I felt pretty low, and I really wanted some orientation, like not in a sort of like new year, new me, here's my 5 goals for the year ahead, but like just what's the direction, what's the orientation, where am I going to pour what am I going to pour the love into? And I feel I sort of like received that during that time together. And it's interesting, again, coming back to the support and the beauty and the lessons and the teachings of the natural world, the modern human world. I've had a few of these experiences in my life where when I'm confronted with something like quite fierce in the modern human world, I somehow am able to like just absorb a little bit of that fierceness and a little bit of that chutzpah. You know, the river yesterday, just like so out there, so unapologetically, so boldly out there. You know, I've had experiences like that when hiking up a mountain. I'm just like, this mountain, this enduring huge mountain, and I'm kind of like, and I'm able to absorb a little bit of that endurance from the mountain, and so I feel quite electric, actually. I feel quite zingy at the moment, which is really not how I was feeling at all just a couple of days ago. So yeah, I'm feeling good.
Yeah, definitely some dart energy was transferred, was transmuted, or something transy happened. Something happened out there yesterday, didn't it, with that river?
And I just think the wind, like, there's this beautiful strong west wind blowing as well across the mine. I just how that brings new energy and new life into us, into things. So
even walking through like really deep squelchy mud, you know, like no one said it's going to be easy, but you keep walking.
May the year be full of squelches.
Squelchy bogs, strong west winds.
Yeah, exactly.
At your back, hopefully.
Yeah. Marvelous. Well, we should call it a session.
Yeah.
I reckon.
And yeah, we'll gather again in the coming months, and we'll be able to we'll be able to sort of speak to the daringness, hopefully,
And thanks for joining us around our fire.
Exactly.
Our little fireside gathering in a little cottage here deep in the heart of the moor.
Exactly. So until next time, peace and out, as they say.
Peace and out.
If you've appreciated listening to this podcast, would you consider sharing it with a friend or leaving us a rating or review via your podcast provider? It helps more people to find us and we'd be most grateful.
So hope you enjoyed that conversation with Evva and Mark. As I say, that was in the spirit of openness, sharing our kind of ramblings and our learnings from this work as we go. If you're interested in any of this, go to becomingcrew.com and you can find out more about what's coming up and how to get involved. Like I say, we've got an offering for individuals, we've got an offering for teams in organisations, and we've got a new thing coming quite soon, which is very exciting for, I guess, a creative learning journey for anyone who's working with story in our culture. So that's coming pretty soon. That's in collaboration with Stories for Life. But yeah, you can check it out on the site, or you can sign up to the newsletter, on our Substack, becomingcrew.substack.com. If you sign up to that newsletter, you'll get all of the updates of any of these programs as they're launching and other stuff. New season of the podcast coming shortly, so expect some awesome conversations coming down the line very soon. Appreciate your support. Please do share with anyone you think who may enjoy this stuff. It really helps. Reviews, ratings, sharing, the score. Don't want to bang on about it, but it's really, really useful for small independent podcasters like myself. Look after yourselves out there. It's definitely time to get outside as much as we can. The light is increasing. There are little signs and shifts of life everywhere. Look after yourself. Until next time, peace and out.
This podcast is created in service to life, for you. It takes time, funds and energy to make. If you'd like to contribute to the running costs, you can donate the price of a cuppa or a pint. Find the link on our website. This podcast wouldn't exist without the following crew: Charlie Shred, Audio Jedi; Vicky Turner, Show Notes; Seaman Home Burgess, Engine Room; Willow Burgess, Jingles.